Hello and welcome, I'm J-Man and this is my review of Sonic 1. This is the first review that I'm posting here on the channel, and it's also going to be the start of a long project here. If there's one thing you should know about the way that I play video games, it's that when I start being interested in a franchise, I tend to try and start from the beginning and make my way through the whole series in release order if I can. That being said, over the last month I played through the entire Sonic the Hedgehog series, save for Mania, which I'm working on now. I'm serious, you can go ahead and look at my how long to beat account if you don't believe me. And so, I'm going to be reviewing each game here on the channel, culminating in a main video retrospective of the series' history. As a disclaimer, I played all of the 2D classic games on the Sonic Origins collection, which added the drop dash from Sonic Mania, widescreen support, and removed lives, among many other changes. So keep that in mind going forward. Now, in order to talk about this first game, it's important to understand the context that resulted in its creation. Sega's first attempt with countering Nintendo with the Sega Master System didn't really work out too well, and one of the reasons that is that the NES and Nintendo had Mario, and Sega didn't really have a mascot, which was important back in those days. So with the Sega Genesis, they decided to make a mascot in order to rival Mario, and on June 23rd, 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog launched the Sega Genesis into relevancy. Among many other reasons, Sonic the Hedgehog and all of the games that released on the Sega Genesis helped solidify Sega as Nintendo's first real rival, and Sonic as Mario's. The character was created on the concept of having a bad attitude and going really fast, even going so far as to jump off the screen, costing you a life if you don't touch the controller in too long. The main gameplay loop of the classic games focuses on momentum-based platforming, although as you'll see later, I don't really think that's used all that well within the level design of the first game. So without further ado, let's get into it. Right off the bat, the start screen is full of personality, taking advantage of the 16-bit graphics that the Genesis allowed over the NES's 8-bit. This start screen also perfectly shows the distinctive qualities that set Sonic apart from the competition at this point in his lifetime. And upon starting, we're met with one of the most iconic stages in video game history. What in the world could I say about Green Hill Zone that hasn't been talked to death over the last nearly 35 years? Act 1 set the standard for classic Sonic levels and the design philosophy that even 3D Sonic stages would go on to be praised for. The top of the level takes more effort to stay on, but by far is the fastest path. The bottom is the punishment path, which you can't stray off of, but is less forgiving and far slower. And the middle path is a healthy mix of both. It's easy to stay on, rewarding, and relatively quick. This design principle would go on to be the standard by which all future Sonic levels were judged. Linear stages are generally more frowned upon in the community, and stages that have multiple branching paths that are quicker the harder they are to find are generally more liked than really well designed but linear stages. That being said, the visual aspect of this level is super charming, and there's a reason it keeps getting called back to in plenty of the following games in the series. The cartoony, bright color palette works really well with the upbeat music and similarly cartoony sound design, which was more common in games of this era. Speaking of the sound design, something about the sound design of Sonic 1 is just so satisfying, and all of the classic games for that matter. Sonic's jumping sound effect is bound to get stuck in your head with how often you do it, and the ring collecting sound is genuinely one of the most iconic sound bites in video game history, for good reason. This is going to become a trend with the series. Regardless of the quality of whatever game you're talking about, Sonic always has and always will have top-tier music and sound design. The boss for Green Hill Zone is super easy, just keep jumping from platform to platform. But just like the stage before it, it's a great introduction to how the boss fights will work going forward and sets expectations. Overall, Green Hill Zone is widely regarded as a great introductory level for a reason, so let's take a look at what comes next. Marble Zone is the reason why I never fully finished the original release of this game. I grew up in a far more forgiving era of video games, and to be honest, losing progress really bothers me no matter the context. Don't worry, I'm under no illusion that it's anything other than a skill issue, and a result of the baby easy mode that games after the Genesis era have compared to earlier releases, but it's true nonetheless. I own a Sega Genesis, and playing older games on original hardware versus modern re-releases really makes you feel the differences in having a save feature. I'm so obsessive about my save progress that when I was a kid and I would play Pokemon games, I would genuinely save like 5 times in a row just to make sure that I didn't lose even so much as a step. And because this level sent me back to Green Hill more times than I could count, I decided to put the Genesis away and get the Sonic Origins collection. Honestly, this probably ended up being cheaper overall than trying to get all the old games plus the add-ons to play Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic CD on all original hardware, and it lets me save in the first 2 games. Tangents aside, let's talk Marble Zone. This zone is where the stage design flaws in the first game start to really show. The game was marketed around the whole fast-moving, momentum-based platforming thing. So when you get to the second stage after the amazing tutorial that was Green Hill Zone expecting to take the training wheels off and really start going fast, Marble Zone starts to disappoint you when you realize that's not what you're gonna get. What you do get is a bunch of stage design focusing on waiting for floating blocks and catching you off guard if you try to speed up. Don't get me wrong, I don't think any stage should be hold forward to win, looking at you forces, but not letting the players go fast at all, and forcing them to take their time on just about the whole stage in the second level of the game is a bit much. And for most of the rest of the game, it doesn't get better. The Egg Scorcher was a fun improvement on the first boss, but not much more than that. It expands on some skills that the previous one was trying to teach you, but it can't be a huge improvement since we're still super early on. It's simple but distinct, which is what the game was aiming for with this boss. I think that Springyard Zone was a lot of fun. It has very strong visual theming and gimmicks, and is probably the best use of momentum throughout the whole first game. I really like the pinball gimmick since it fits well with Sonic's whole turning into a ball thing, but looking back on it in retrospect after having played the whole series, they really lean heavy on the pinball thing throughout the rest of the series. It seems like whenever they're out of ideas for a gimmick zone, this is what they rely on. Of course, it was fun the first few times, but it wasn't always as well executed as it is here, particularly in Sonic Heroes. So for me personally, looking back on it, I'm a little bit soured on the whole concept, but that's no fault of the level itself, and on my first playthrough, I really liked it. I generally think that boss fights are hard to make interesting and distinct in a 2D setting, especially in this game where they're all themed around the same core concept of Eggman flying around in a similarly shaped egg robot. But the Egg Stinger does a great job at differentiating itself. As simple as it is, it's also really inventive, which is exactly what it needed to be. Nothing special. Oh, to go back to the days of my life where developers refusing to stop doing water and ice levels in platformers was my biggest concern. Hot take, I really don't mind water levels all that much. Maybe this comes from playing a version of the game without lives, but I found it just stressful enough to avoid drowning where it wasn't overwhelming. I think there were plenty of air bubble checkpoints to the point where it wasn't overwhelming, but it was still stressful when that counter starts. The game is already super slow compared to what the marketing would have you believe, so the fact that the underwater sections are already slower doesn't bother me as much as it would in a game like Sonic 2, which in itself is faster than this game. I've already been moving super slow, so it really wasn't anything new to me. The visual theming of this level is super simplistic and kind of careless, which I wish would have been done better, but it kind of seems like the entire creative team hunkered down to make Green Hill Zone as good as it could be. So honestly, if I had to choose between getting the Green Hill Zone that we got and the rest of the game being relatively visually boring, or the entire game being alright, I'd choose the outcome that we got. Overall, this level was pretty inoffensive to me. I didn't love it, but I also didn't hate it. I've kind of come around on water levels in recent years, so I appreciate that they were trying to implement different gameplay styles and not repeat the same kind of levels over and over throughout the entire game. But there's one thing that I have to talk about that I absolutely hated within this zone, and that's the boss, or more accurately, the lack thereof. The Eggmobile and platforming challenge that you have to do to defeat it is just so unforgiving and precise that it's totally not fun at all. In my experience, if you get hit even once, you're not going to make it out of the water in time without drowning. And that run back is so long for absolutely no reason. This boss is just an overly precise challenge, and the game hasn't asked anything of this level from you before, and it never does again. It's not a huge deal, and I mostly moved past it once I finished the fight, but it's just a super random difficulty spike for absolutely no reason. Starlight Zone was another really fun and inventive level, going to show how innovative the team wanted to get with the level gimmicks. I really liked the pogo stick mechanic, and the way that it was implemented in the boss was a great evolution of the mechanic that they introduced. It's one of the best uses of the platforming system that this game has to offer. Overall, while I don't have a ton to say about this level, I really like the fact that the developers were willing to mess around with level layouts and gimmicks to keep the gameplay fresh, something they'll only get better with as the classic series progresses. I also liked Scrap Brain Zone a lot as the final platforming challenge to end the game on. There are some really unique stage gimmicks and tough enemy placement, and this is about as difficult as the game could get with the mechanics it had at launch without being unfair. The visual theme of this zone is super industrialized, which contrasts greatly with the first level, really selling that idea that Sonic has gone on this journey to the heart of Dr. Robotnik's base, where all the robots you've been seeing throughout the whole game were made. It's the perfect theme to end the game on. I had a little bit of difficulty with it, but ultimately I think the level was expertly crafted to test the player but not be unfair, since people at the time would be going into this level with their whole playthrough on the line. The final zone isn't so much a full zone. Visually, it's the exact same as Scrap Brain, but it just contains a final boss fight, which personally I liked a whole lot. Yeah, it's super simple and kind of random, especially by today's standards, but it was originally created to be the ending of a whole game in one sitting, so it makes complete sense that it would be this simple, which is honestly kind of a handicap that I've been using to judge the bosses through in this game and Sonic 2, since they share the aspect of not having a save system. One final note that I like to make about the special stages in this game: I'm not going to be the first person to call attention to the fact that they absolutely suck. I played them once and I didn't choose to go back to them. Generally, when I play older games, I play them for one reason, and that's a simple, fun time. I don't really bother to revisit parts that I didn't enjoy, since I don't see any reason to. The Sonic Origins collection, or maybe one of the previous remasters, I'm not entirely sure, added Super Sonic to this game, but I personally didn't find it all that compelling of a reason to play this and restart levels over and over to get the Chaos Emeralds. Overall, I think Sonic the Hedgehog 1 was a great first outing for the character. There's a lot of heart and innovation in the level design, it just doesn't take as much advantage of the momentum platforming as later games do, so it gets kind of a bad rap. Even though most of the choices that people don't like about the levels stemmed from the developers not wanting each level to be the same, and regardless of the state of the final product, I can respect that. While the game is incredibly flawed in hindsight and rarely delivers on the promise of high-speed platforming action, looking at the game from the time of release, these issues probably wouldn't bother me so much. The only reason these issues bother me so much is because I'm comparing it to the recent games like Sonic Mania or Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which improved on the formula pretty objectively. Then again, I was born over 10 years after the release, so please take my opinion on the game in that era with a grain of salt. The criticism that was levied against this game set the stage for Sonic 2 to blast on the scene better than ever before, which we'll talk about next time. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first review, so like always, I welcome criticism since I want every video to be better than the last. If there was something about this video that you didn't like, please let me know. Anyway, that's all for me today. Peace.